We have discussed in the previous video the word Vayigash and the root nogash, nun gimel shin, which means to approach, what really means to confront. There are other words that are very closely related to nun gimel shin. There is a word nun gimel sin, nogas, the nogasim, which we read about in a few weeks' time in Parashat Shemos. The nogasim and the shotrim. The nogasim were the overseers of the Hebrew slaves in Egypt. And this is also a form of approaching, but it's approaching in a very, very negative way. It is confronting in a very, very negative way. It means to oppress. And it is closely related, but it is, let's say, the left hand of Vayigash. Vayigas and Vayigash. The only difference between the two words would be that one has the dot on the right hand of the letter shin, and the other one has the dot on the left hand side of the letter shin, and then it becomes a sin. Very often words that are spelled with this shin and with the sin, and that's the only difference between the two. The sin has a sort of a more negative connotation than the shin. In any case, there's yet another word that is related to this complex of letters, and that is the root gimel shin shin, goshash. And we find that word in a passage in Isaiah, in Yeshayahu. Let me get it for you. In Sefer Yeshayahu, in the 59th chapter, we read, the context is not so terribly important. These words are valid in all times. Let's see what it says there. It says there, I read two psukim for you in the 59th chapter, verses 9 and 10. Pasuk tes, pasuk yud. Al kein rochak mishpat mimenu, v'laus hasigenu tzedakah, nekavelo al v'hinei choshech, l'naga haus, va'afilaus nahalech, negashesho ge'ivrim kier, uge'ein enayim negasheshu, koshalnu b'tzoraim kaneshev, v'ashmanim kamesim. Therefore, I'm translating now. Therefore, justice is far away from us, and righteousness has not caught up with us. We hoped for light, and behold, it was darkness. In the brightness, we walk in darkness. We grope the walls like blind men, and like people who have no eyes, we pat the walls. We have stumbled at midday as if it is dark. We walk in darkness like dead people. What's he talking about here? He's saying when you are in a situation of hopelessness, if you're in a situation where you cannot see the justice of things and the correct solution, the tzedakah, the righteousness escapes you, and you hope for light, but all you can see is darkness, then even when it is light all around you, for you it is dark. You walk in the bright light as if it is dark. You hold fast onto the walls. You try to find your way, to grope your way through the darkness. Actually, full day. It's Tzoraim. It's bright daylight. But for you, for somebody who is in this desperate situation, it feels like darkness. And his tread is unstable. He has to hold on to the wall, even though physically there's nothing wrong with him. He can walk, but his mind is clouded. And if the mind is clouded, the eyes can't see. That's what the Nabi says. That's what the Prophet says here. As if we have no eyes, this is how we grope, we touch the wall and try to find our way. We have stumbled in the middle of the day. In the darkness, we walk as if we're dead. That groping, that holding on to the wall is a debased form of approaching. When you lean on artificial support, you cannot see your way through the difficulties, then what you hold on to is a very negative form of confrontation. You confront the wrong thing. You try to find a support where there is no support. The only thing that you actually have to do is clear your mind. If your mind is clear, then your eyes can see. You cannot see what you do not want to see. Very striking example of not being able to see what you don't expect to see is the situation of the brothers of Joseph in Egypt, when they have met this man close up a number of times, and they cannot see it Joseph, because the eyes will not be able to see what the mind has excluded from being possible. It cannot be Joseph, therefore I cannot see it as Joseph. This inability to see what the mind cannot grasp is something that each and every one of us has, because what we can see is not dictated by the light that strikes the retina of our eyes. It is first and foremost determined by our mind with which we see. We do not see with us. We see with our mind. And what we decide that we can see, that we will see. And what we exclude to be possible, we cannot possibly see. Very simple. Where are my car keys? Let me see. They're not on my nightstand table. Where could I have put them? Maybe they're on. Maybe they're in the kitchen. Let me look in the kitchen. The only thing that I haven't taken into account is that they're lying right in front of me on the table. It's not that I see them and overlook them. I cannot see them. If I do not expect them to be there, they won't be there. And therefore, in our own life, it is what we decide to be able to see. That is what we can see. And what we have put out of our mind, that simply isn't there for us. The expressions that Yeshayahu uses here, people in despair, for people who cannot see a way out, doesn't mean that the situation is really hopeless. It means that they are hopeless. Therefore, the situation in their own eyes, in their own experience, is also hopeless. So that's one aspect of this word. Goshash, Gimel, Shin, Shin, is this expression of groping and holding on to things that are the wrong thing to confront. If people stumble around and hold on to all kinds of artificial supports without realizing what they really should do, that is a very negative way of confronting one's own situation. Now I want to come to another occurrence of the same root that is around these letters Gimel Shin, Gimel Shin, Gimel Shin, and that is Goshen, the land of Goshen, that features so prominently in this week's Seder and in next week's Seder as well. The name Goshen occurs 10 times in Bereshis, and of course, mainly concentrated in this week's Seder. It's clear that Vayigash and Goshen are intimately related. The three root letters of Vayigash are Nun, Gimel, Shin, and Goshen is spelled Gimel, Shin, Nun. It's exactly the same letters. And in fact, Goshen is a land, an area, a region which is close to Egypt, but not quite Egypt. It is like adjacent to Egypt, just like Kilburn sometimes is called West Hampstead, right? Because it ought to be Hampstead, it's not quite Hampstead. So Goshen is a country near to Egypt. Why were the Jews in Goshen? Joseph always planned them to be in Goshen. He says, go and live in Goshen, you will be near to me. You will not be with me, but you will be near to me, because I will be in Egypt proper, where I'm the viceroy. I have my responsibilities, but you're not too far away from me. You are adjacent to Egypt. That is Goshen. Why were they in Goshen? What is the rationale that Joseph gives for them having to be in Goshen? It is that their occupation, it is their business. They are cattle owners. They are herdsmen, and herdsmen are an abomination in the eyes of the Egyptians. This is very strange. I could imagine that chimney sweeps are an abomination because they're all dirty, or that leather tanners in the Gomorrah, it's very often brings the case of leather tanners to me. They smell of their business and they are unpleasant to be around with. They are unpleasant to be around. But what's wrong with people who have a cattle business? For this, we need to see the role of the animal in Egypt. Egypt had a dual relationship with animals, with livestock. They despised the herdsmen, but they idolized animals. They had their holy calf, the Apis calf, and they had various of their idols appeared in animal form. There was one with a crocodile head, and another one was a cat, a holy cat. It's an interesting relationship that Egypt has with the animal kingdom. There is, of course, simply the social tension between the herdsmen of, let's say, the Sinai Peninsula, of the grazing grounds for the cattle, and the settled population of the agricultural country of Egypt, which was in the ancient world the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Very fertile land, not dependent on rainfall, very prosperous. They looked askance at the tribesmen, and they were a little bit afraid of them because they felt that they could be under threat of these tribesmen, that if the tribesmen would not have enough sustenance for their flocks and for their cattle on the grazing grounds in the time of drought, for example, they may invade and just steal the food from the storehouses of the Egyptians with the force of weapons. Therefore, in the ancient world, there was an institution called ger. a resident alien, that in times that the tribesmen of the grazing grounds would be in economic trouble because of a drought, the agricultural population would open the gates to their villages and cities and give refuge and sustenance to the tribesmen, basically to buy them off. But it was a well-accepted institution to dwell as strangers. You find it a number of times when Elimelech and Naomi in Sefer Rus, in the book of Ruth, have a drought in Eretz Yehuda. They go to Moab, Lo Gur Shom, to dwell there as resident aliens. And by the same token, the sons of Yaakov and Yaakov himself came to Egypt, Lo Gur Shom, to dwell there on a temporary basis. Refugee crises are as old as the world itself. And various systems of society have found various solutions to this problem. Temporary residency is one of them. So that's simply the socio-economic background of the aversion that the Egyptians had of tribesmen who are cattle owners and have their flocks grazing in the grazing grounds in the areas around Egypt, the less fertile areas, which are enough to sustain a flock, but not enough to sustain towns and villages and cities. For that, you need agriculture and storehouses. But there is a deeper reason. The Egyptians' relationship with the animal kingdom was one of awe and a little bit of apprehension. Therefore, they made their gods in the form of animals to appease the animal world. And for that reason, people who tamed the animals and who made the animals, who exercised human control over the animals, were an abomination for the Egyptians. We could even go further. The control over the animal life and the animal kingdom on the spiritual level is the control over one's own inner animalistic nature. This, for the Egyptians, was not acceptable. It was not an attractive proposition because it means being responsible for one's own inner animal. They'd rather deify it and treat it as an object of worship than to control it and be master over it. There's another thing that was an abomination in the eyes of the Egyptians, and that's we read in last week's Sabbath. When Joseph makes a festive meal for his foreign visitors, the Torah describes that Joseph and his Egyptian entourage were eating separately from these Hebrew herdsmen that came to visit, because to eat together with Ivrim, with people from the other side, was an abomination in the eyes of the Egyptians. They didn't like that. And here we may have a little look at the word to eat in Hebrew. The root of to eat, ochal, is aleph, kaf, lamed. And aleph, one, and kaf lamed means call, everything. The act of eating is a way of connecting everything, the whole natural world, with the aleph, with the echad, with the one origin. When you have food and you make a bracha, you make a blessing, you eat the food under acknowledgement of its origin, then you create a connection of the material world with its spiritual source. That eating, that type of connection was an abomination for the Egyptians. It's interesting that the burning of the korbanos, of the sacrifices on the altar of the Beis HaMikdash, is called in the Gemara Achilas HaMizbeach, eating of the altar. Is it then that we have to, God forbid, feed God with our sacrifices? Of course not. That's ridiculous. We need to look at what physically the act of eating accomplishes. The act of eating is not necessary for the body. Many people have this misapprehension that eating somehow sustains the body. It doesn't. It doesn't do any such thing. The food that you eat is not getting stored in your body, because that would simply mean that you gain more and more and more weight. The more you eat, the heavier you become, the bigger your body becomes. Of course, a baby needs to grow. Of course, there the food helps to build up the body. But once we are a fully adult individual, then the function of food cannot be to sustain the body. What it actually does, it keeps the body alive and active. It provides the energy for the body to act, to do, to be, and to behave, to achieve. That's done by ingesting food. It gives you strength. It gives you the energy. But it doesn't give you the matter that you ingest. Because let's be honest, every pound, if you're not gaining weight, every pound that you eat, you excrete as well on the other side. So food is not, as is usually understood, some kind of stuff that you need to build your body up. The stuff has nothing to do with it. It goes too deep to completely analyze what exactly the physical function of food is. But take it from me, the sustenance of the body does not come from the stuff in the food, but from the form that that stuff takes, its organization, its beauty, its intricate structure. That is being absorbed by the body. You can also see that quite literally. The food that you ingest, that's beautiful on your plate, when it leaves your body, there's no beauty left. It's just, well, rubbish, isn't it? So this connection between the aleph and the kol, le'echal, to eat, this was abhorrent to the Egyptians. So we see that Jews had to keep themselves apart from this Egyptian culture to a certain extent. And therefore they dwelt in Eretz Goshen, country nearby, that was adjacent to. It confronted Egypt, but was not absorbed by Egypt. Of course, in as far as Jews actually kept themselves to themselves in Goshen, in a form of, I would call it semi-isolation. It's not isolation. It was a confrontation. It was nearby Egypt. They have interaction with the Egyptians. They even, Pharaoh gave them a job to be the inspectors and the responsible maintenance personnel for Pharaoh's own flocks, which Egyptians, it was beneath their dignity to occupy themselves with such dirty business as being carers for the animal life, just as it was not the Egyptians' business to be masters over their own inner beasts. So let's keep that in mind when we hear the words of Parsha this week. Wish you all a good Shabbos.